The first 10 minutes of this video is going to be a series of clips from a much longer live stream. I highly recommend taking the time to watch it in its entirety. Nils is the real deal. When people talk about Norse pagans or practicing the old ways, he is who they're referring to. The knowledge he provides in that live stream comes from 2,700 years of oral history and tradition passed down through generations. I tried to pull the most relevant clips to start this video with. I'm gonna let those clips run without interrupting because he covers a lot of ground better than I ever could.
So my name is Nils, and I am from Sweden. So jag är svenska. Our family's from the north, all over Sweden, in Norway. We still have family in Norway as well. Born in Borås, raised in Hammerdal. Came to America, and I have been here since. And my wife is Danish American, so we're still here. Been back and forth many times. So our family and our bloodline still practice the Old Norse religion. We do have some Christians in our family too. My brother's a Christian. And the reason that my brother is not Old Norse pagan or I'm not a Christian is because we're taught every belief, every religion on the face of the planet when we get to a certain age. And then we make the decision. It's not indoctrinated or forced upon us. That way we still honor the old rule of free will. This to honor my ancestors and where I come from. Old Norse pagans is the old belief that we have been able to come out more in the past 100 to 200 years without persecution. It's a lot more prevalent, and it's paganism as a whole, not just Norse believers, is rising even faster. What scares me the most is how many people are being attracted or recruited into the Odinic ways of
and
Odinism.
It sounds like it's pretty prevalent up there as well in Indiana, correct?
Yeah, there's pagans, there's Wiccans, there's Norse pagans. They actually have a big festival called Nerf, which is an annual gathering of many different ones. People have asked me if I wanted to attend. I know there's a lot from the Odinists that attend that, so it's like, no, I'll just stay where I'm at.
Yes, motion, it states that Odinism was hijacked by the white nationalists. Is that true? Or what do you think about it?
Odinism was started as a folkish heathen movement, traditionally with the old Germanic practices. That limited only white individuals, and at the beginning only white men to be allowed to join. So they weren't hijacked. It was created as a white supremacist organization. And then later in America, it was more prevalent in prisons and jails because they segregated in jails. I don't know why. It became more prevalent in prisons for those white groups and other white supremacist groups.
So leading into that part, so if this memorandum is correct, what's your thoughts on their accusations of him technically not having any ties and the guards having ties, and this potentially being one of their groups?
I think the group is keeping it very hidden right now. They're keeping it very silent and quiet, especially with the guards protecting him. You know, being within earshot of attorneys and family and things like that.
Would you be under the impression, after reading the memorandum, would you be under the impression if it was more than one person that would have done it?
It had to be. Honestly, I think it was more than one person. And the entire group knew the small group of people. I think whatever. I don't know how that their structure is in the Odinic Rite. I know that they use the term. They have like at their top. They have what's called the Court of Goatees, which is like a priest in our belief. And each of their little groups, local groups, have a goatee. But as far as from there in between, I don't know how they're structured So I would say that from their local group, they probably knew about the murders. But they didn't call it that. They called it, sacrifice.
And that kind of follows back with Nita's question. Do Norse magic practitioners tend to fracture from core practice to their own subject of practice? Kind of like Christians have different denominations.
There are Norse pagans who do practice Sade magic, which is the Old Norse magic. Not necessarily just black magic. But they also do Old Celtic magic. They might do the Roman pantheon style of magic, or they'll worship their gods too. Or Wiccan magic. There's a lot of Norse pagans that practice Wiccan magic as well.
I saw a mixture of all of it, and they all have their different runes, I noticed as well. Their own spin-off on certain, when I was researching it. Even though it might not be legit, they have their own twist, it seems like.
Yeah. So a goatee is a priest. And in the modern sense, with some of these groups, it's basically the leader of their little local group or a larger group. They call themselves goatees. It takes a lot of knowledge. It takes a lot of seclusion and isolation and many, many, many years to study to become a goatee. So some of them are saying goatee, but they don't know all of the knowledge about.
And that's what caught my attention is when I did my reading. And Susanna can hear me. I probably said it until I was blue in the face that I always felt like it was a false prophet. Not saying that he is, but it definitely gave me the sense of a false prophecy, as in not legit, and kind of putting that facade on with religion as the forefront when it really isn't.
Yes, so a lot of them, they want to be somebody. They want to be a leader in a religious organization or cult, but they don't know all the information. They don't have all of that knowledge. And this knowledge was actually, it's still oral in our family. It was kept secret because of religious persecution. So everything that has come out, not all of it is written. And there was a reason for that.
This is where I was going to, because damn Harley Dad. So he could have been misinterpreting the entire religion. And that's what we were touching base on and talking about earlier, is it makes me think of a mix of trying to comprehend the religion mixed with fandom, fantasy, and extremism.
Yes, a combination of each one.
By this point in the stream, Nils had done a fair amount of sharing what he believes, how things work, and they moved to a more candid Q&A. I want to clarify that this conversation took place right after the Franks memo came out. New information has come out since then, but I really felt it was important to start this video off with an honest reaction to and conversation about the Franks memo, because this is what that looks like. But I am going to include the clips where he discusses the runes and leads into his final thoughts, and we'll go from there.
Blood offerings, in our belief, are considered the most valid and the most legit, I guess. The reason for this is because there's two essences of life. This is any human that you cannot live without, and that's breath or blood. You lose one or the other, you're going to die. Your blood is very sacred.
I saw also when I was researching, they can use saliva as well.
Yes, saliva was given. That goes from a being that was created after the Asur-Vanir War, when the two tribes decided to make peace. They created a human that was the wisest of all beings, named Kvasir, and they each spit into a bowl to create. So even in Norse magic, saliva is considered, it's very highly regarded as sacred.
And on Abby's body, I noticed that there are antlers at her head. Do you have any idea of why they would, or symbolizing of the horns or antlers? Because the way she was shaped, it almost looked like a hangman with the binding on top, the binding rune. The way the leg was bent, it almost looked like my tarot cards.
Huh.
The way the leg was bent. Does that make sense?
Or like the Celtic Green Man, Cernunnos, with the antlers.
I'll check that.
The Earth Fawn. No, whoops, I can't remember the name of the other term the old Germanics used, but the old Germanic tribes. But normally in rituals, we have worn antlers before, and that's like an antenna to help connect with you and the elements. So why they would put that on her, I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of strange things from seeing the pictures and seeing the sketches and seeing some of the runes that were used. Like, why? It just doesn't make any sense. It makes zero sense to me.
It almost makes me think of them mixing it with fandom.
Yes, that's the best. That's accurate.
Because it's far from what I've ever understood, and also it's almost like they've taken it to an extreme that it really isn't, and it's not meant to be either.
Yes, like they saw it in a movie and said, "Hey, let's do this because it looks cool." That's the impression that I'm getting from this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was different ones. There was Gibo, there was Ansus, there was Feu, I saw Isa, Othala, and Othala looks like a diamond with two wings at the bottom, with two legs basically. And Othala is with many rune, not the one that everybody's been talking about. Oh, that's the rune of Odin. That's the ancestral knowledge that of the cosmos that Odin knows. So a lot of people are now on social media and all over the news. They're saying, "Oh, well, that's Odin's rune." It's actually Othala, which is inheritance and legacy. So it's misconstruing these runes as to what they actually mean. And then like Hagalas, you'll see Gibo, and then a line straight down, which is Isa. Isa is ice, which is steel. Gibo is actually a protection rune. And then Hagalas as well. And they're either mispronouncing rather the name, or they don't know exactly what rune they're looking at, so they're just Googling anything to come up with these runes. So the runes are connected to an ancient primordial knowledge. I mean, the father of the gods basically had to sacrifice himself to himself for 9 days in order to see that, and then give it to mankind and the rest of the gods. So there's a lot of things that can happen to people by not understanding and respecting the runes themselves.
It was just a kids' activity.
It's not a game. It's not for fun.
It was just a kids' activity.
I have runes here at home. It's upstairs on my altar, and they stay there 99% of the time. But people just blindly going out saying, well, it's something to mess with it. Not every Norse pagan messes with Norse magic, which we call Sade. Not everyone is practitioners of Old Norse magic. The females were known as Volva. Robin, that's what I'm thinking, and this is something that they wanted to do for a maybe as an offering to Odin, but they didn't know how to do it the right way, or they were misconstrued, or were not knowledgeable enough to know an actual ritual. It was just monkey see, monkey do, or
It was just a kids' activity.
it looks cool. That's the impression that I'm taking from it.
Now, I'm curious because also when they were unalived, it was on the 13th. it was not on the 14th. Would you think of any significance that would be with that at all?
We consider 13 an unlucky number. Christians have their reason. But we consider it the number of Loki.
And that falls back to that Loki and shit, the trickster, the con artist, the kin killer, the brother killer.
Some Order members say Bruce Pierce was the trigger man. Were you there when Alan Berg was killed?
I have no comment, I'm sorry.
He talked about it?
Oh, yeah.
Proud of it?
Proud of it. He was bragging about how the gun jammed on the 13th bullet and how 13 means something, you know.
Their first mission was to raise a war chest for the extreme right. If not legally, then through counterfeiting and robbery.
And then when we found out that they were running around Rushville, spinning counterfeit 20.
Using the presses at Aryan Nations, the group had begun printing counterfeit money. When Bruce Pierce tried to pass the poorly forged bills, he was arrested.
I never saw Bob like that before. He was upset, real pale. He said, what's the matter, Bob? I said, I got to do something.
I got in the car myself. I drove all the way down to Rushville. And on the way, I'm telling her, pack up all his shit. I want anything that has club-related pictures on it, words on it, every single damn thing that he's gotten while he's been a hang around in a probate. And I said, I'm pulling his patch. I'm coming to get all the shit, and I did.
But we consider it the number of Loki, and as an unlucky number, which is... So the fact that it came out on the 13th is like, that something's not right.
13 means something, you know.
So now that we've had a very brief, very general crash course overview from someone who knows what he's talking about, we're going to switch gears a little bit and let Ocean Keltoi give us a little bit more of a general overview crash course on the modern Asatru movement.
In heathenry, this will manifest as the idea that the religion is centered around an ancestral connection. They believe that the celebration of that ancestral connection is only possible if you have the right ancestors, that only certain kinds of souls can connect you to the gods, and that this is somehow factually the case. So let's talk about folkism. What is it? Where did it come from? And how is it addressed? But after going through the various definitions of folkism that exist, there wasn't one that I felt was clear enough to really capture what folkists actually believe as informed by their actions. And after a long back and forth with Eliakai, we coined this definition, that folkism is the belief that ancestral ties give benefit, privilege, or access to a religious tradition, especially in lieu of a living culture. Now, different traditions will employ this strategy in different ways, but most will try to play a game of ethnic separatism around their religion. And what makes it so sneaky is that they are basically cherry-picking to support their point. Whereas polytheism naturally acknowledges and even blends with other faiths, and often did historically, folkism denies this important fact of history to place humans in neat little boxes that do not reflect reality, currently or historically. To understand some of the roots of the current expression of this idea, we have to go back a few years. So, heathenry contains within it what is probably the most overt expression of folkism, and there's a lineage of this with respect to the way folkist rhetoric has ties going back to the Nazi supremacy narrative. This isn't an often talked about thing, but the Nazis did have a program to strip Christianity away from their culture. The problem, as they saw it, was that Jesus was Jewish and was the son of the God of the Jewish people. This obviously presented problems for the Nazis. So one of the ways that they tried to fix this issue was to build a transitional faith called positive Christianity. It eliminated the Old Testament and any other element of the Bible that they perceived as having Jewish authorship. And they went through phases of saying that Christ was Aryan or that Christ didn't exist, but this was supposed to be a transitional faith to a new one that was going to be more focused on the Nazi state, where Mein Kampf would replace the Bible and the swastika would replace the cross. So this program was led by a Nazi named Alfred Rosenberg, who is considered one of the more influential contributors to Nazi ideology. Rosenberg believed that religious and cultural transformation was cornerstone to the success of the Reich, but This program was eventually abandoned in large part because German preachers were not receptive. Christianity was split between those who called themselves German Christians, who supported positive Christianity, and the confessing church, who was in opposition to positive Christianity. And the project was considered largely unimportant, as the Nazis' major focus was mobilization for total war rather than a religious debate. So, positive Christianity eventually died out when the Nazis lost the war. Now, why is this important? Because during this time there was another faction called the German Faith Movement, which was small, but it was associated with the Nazi Party. It saw Hitler as a sort of savior, it implemented blood and soil rhetoric, but it was heavily influenced by Norse paganism, and its founder, Nazi Party member Jacob Wilhelm Hauer, died in 1962 and continued promoting the German Faith Movement well after the war. Carl Jung wrote an article entitled Wotan in 1936, which continued to influence white supremacist movements well after World War II. And in it, he discusses the subconscious archetype of the wild German spirit, hiding in various expressions of German culture. And it even references Hitler unleashing the spirit of Wotan among the Germans young and old. And Jung references these aforementioned movements here, in which he talks about the nationalist God attacking Christianity and suggesting that German Christians were mistaken in their loyalty. He suggests that it would be better for them to join the German faith movement, describing them as decent and well-meaning people. And he notes that this would be preferable because Wotan is a German god, and therefore the god of the Germans. Now, these movements and the Wotan article would wind up influencing a man named Stephen McNallen, who is among the earlier Americans who revived Norse paganism on this side of the pond. He's a good speaker, he's a good writer, and an excellent propagandist. He has worked as a soldier, corrections officer, journalist, teacher, and spiritual leader over the course of his life, and his most recent work was with Red Ice TV, during which he often references the article that I mentioned earlier by Carl Jung. Let's take a look.
Tonight, I want to talk to you about race. Now, this is not meant to be a race discussion. This is meant to be a race discussion. But defeat brought with it only a more savage repression of the Wotan archetype. Germans were now to be peaceful factory workers busily creating an economic miracle, making money. The denazification program was ruthless and relentless. The Allies did everything in their power to bury Wotan's furious ecstasy under gross materialism. I told you about the Wotan Network, an organic, grassroots, long-term campaign to awaken the European-descended peoples. Our aim is to shake our folk from their slumber, to put iron in our collective backbones so we will stand up tall and proud and speak and act in our own defense.
Ancestry is better than universalism.
The Wotan archetype manifested in the revival of nationalism, Germanic mysticism, the occult lore of the runes, and folkish culture. Figures of Jesus on horseback were eerily similar to the repressed image of Wotan. I will defend my race. We white people face numerous threats to our future. Our numbers are shrinking in almost every location on Earth. Europe, our homeland, the place that gave us birth, will be majority non-white within a couple of decades unless, as I intend, we can change that situation. I believe we will see two things happen. First, there will be a violent reaction against the Islamification of Germany. Wotan will arise to defend his people. Although the average German may not want to admit it, the truth is clear. Even if not one more immigrant is allowed in Germany, there are already enough of them to change the face of Germany in the coming years and forever. If the politicians do not remove them, Wotan, whether you think of him as an archetype or as a god, will intervene to restore balance. Wotan now sleeps, but he will waken, and he will be ready for war.
But is folkism valid? Is it just another iteration of heathenry? For a long time, this was kind of the case within heathenry, and among some it still is. but it shouldn't be accepted. To suggest that there is a racial restriction on a tradition is a bold claim indeed, and to say that this is the ancestral intention and a simple reality of the nature of the gods? Surely there's some historical evidence for this, but there is none. In fact, we see the opposite. We see syncretic traditions showing up in pagan traditions all the time. The most notable counterexample to racial traditions would be the syncretism between the Egyptian and Roman pantheon, such as the worship of the Egyptian goddess Isis taking place in Britannia by Romans. Further, we see among various polytheist civilizations that it was customary for visitors of foreign lands to honor the gods of those lands while they were there alongside their own, which means that we have historical precedents of peoples engaging in praxis with deities not of their ancestral faith. Folkism unjustifiably limits the gods. The idea that the gods are only accessible to people with certain ancestry is honestly insulting to the agency of the gods. Folkism puts forward the idea that Odin, the wise wanderer, the wild deity of ecstasy and pain, of poetry and death, is restricted into who he can reach out to among humans, and that this restriction is guided somehow by the magical correlate of DNA molecules referenced in absolutely no ancestral story. This seems absurd and is in dire need of some explanation. To suggest that any deity's actions are halted or allowed by magic contained in our DNA strands is nothing short of silly, especially when discussing gods like Odin or Freya, who command a system of magic that alters the threads of time. These beings are stopped by DNA strands? You may as well worship the DNA strands, which arguably is what folkists do anyway. This can only be informed by an incredibly low opinion of the gods indeed. And the only way that I can figure that McNallen came to this conclusion and just didn't question this element is that he just places a biblical-like authority in Jung over the gods, and then tries to conclude that this element of the DNA communication association is the explanation as to why Jung's article is true. Because with the amount that McNallen references Jung's Wotan article, it is obvious that he considers it like a holy text of some kind. But Jung didn't think of the gods in the same way that McNallen does. Jung thought of Wotan as a racial archetype for the will of the German people during the rise of National Socialism. McNallen thinks that Odin is a god, and yet thinks that Odin functions under these restrictions, and is married to this concept for whatever reason. It's just bad theology, and it was poorly thought through. The arbitrary bubble that folkists have placed around who can and cannot have access to their traditions is violated by the gods themselves. And on the AFA's website, they suggest that without white people, Asatru would no longer exist. The reasoning for this is that all faiths spring forward out of their racial soul. It would follow from this that those without this ancestry would not experience the Norse gods. But they do. The AFA further makes the point that religions are not arbitrary or accidental, and proceed to ground this in evolution. But religions are not arbitrary because the gods are real, not because of evolution. What is arbitrary is changing your ancestral border for acceptance from Northern European folk to ethnic European folk, like the AFA did in 2017. I have said several times before that heathens grow out of the ground. We're not converted, we're called. And it seems that race is not at all a restrictive factor in this calling. If we are to in any way accept our own spiritual experiences as a justifier for our own religion, we must then accept the valid spiritual experiences as others, as justification for their religion. And the truth is, spiritual experience goes far outside the lines that folkists want it to. Humans can be folkists, but it seems that Odin is not. And oh, it is telling that folkists get their beliefs about these racial restrictions from McNallen, and not the sagas, or the gods.
We're going to circle back to this little jerk in a bit. First, we got to talk about the Order, Bob Matthews, and Dave Lane. David Lane, already infamous for his place within the Order, languished in prison, serving a staggering 190-year sentence. But even behind bars, he was determined to continue the cause. He penned an article on 14words.com titled Wotansvolk, invoking the Germanic god Wotan. Lane joined forces with the artist turned ideologue Ron McVan. The Temple of Wotan and the Creed of Iron became their sacred texts. But like all movements, Wotansvolk faced internal strife. In 2002, the administration shifted to John Post, and the original group splintered. By March of 2002, Post announced the formation of the National Prison Kindred Alliance, a joint effort of Wotansvolk and a number of independent Asatru tribal networks seeking to improve the religious rights in penitentiaries. Wotansvolk operated quite a successful prison outreach program. It was a pagan revival among the white prison population, including the conversion of whole prison gangs to the ancestral religion, partly due to the reputation of David Lane and his association with the legendary Order. The Order has everything. Extremism, fanboy delusions, accelerationism, violence, drugs, counterfeiting, robberies, abandoned families.
When we were drug addicts, prostitutes, robbing people, selling drugs to our own people, and got sent to prison, it was 2 men and a woman who uplifted the prisoners. Elsie Christensen, David Lane, and Ron McVan. These were the men and women who reached out to us and helped us and made us who we were. It's time for us to once again uphold that wokeness and Wotansvolk banner, because these so-called older groups, older organizations, they never thought we would last. They thought we would be a fleeting moment. But look at us, 30, 35 years, however long. Look at us now.
The Order wanted to fund the rest of the radical right to create essentially an army of white men.
To fund their plan, the Order attacked an armored truck on a highway in California in broad daylight in a brazen robbery.
This is the middle of the day.
Of FBI agents were shipped onto this rural island in Washington state prepared to do battle.
The FBI finally finds out that Matthews is holed up in a cabin on Whidbey Island and that he's heavily armed.
Bob refused to surrender. We were met with gunfire. I took about 7 rounds just over my head.
After a 36-hour standoff, a flare ignited the cabin and Matthews burned to death. The other members of the Order were quickly arrested. During its investigation, the FBI uncovered plans to poison major water supplies and threats to hang members of Congress, and they found the gun used to murder Alan Berg.
These guys were for real.
Prior to the Order, domestic terrorism was like, what's that? Klansmen had killed civil rights workers and so forth, but this was a new breed of animal.
It was a wake-up call that the white supremacist movement was a growing danger. The federal government believed the Order was not acting alone, and that their crimes were part of a larger plot orchestrated by the leaders of several far-right groups, including Richard Butler.
Were you the leader of this conspiracy? No, I was not.
In a bold move, prosecutors brought 9 of them to trial on charges of seditious conspiracy.
The idea was that they could wipe out this movement in one fell swoop.
And I'm just doing my duty.
The government's key witness was James Ellison, a former extremist leader. He testified that he attended secret meetings at the Aryan World Congress, meetings he described to his deputy, Kerry Noble.
Jim said most of the plans included counterfeiting money, robbing armored cars to help finance the right-wing movement.
You know, just all the men are on alert.
Noble, who also testified for the government, says Ellison claimed movement leaders were in on the Order's plan.
This was real, a real ideology, a real goal for people.
But Ellison also had credibility problems. He liked to call himself King James of the Ozarks, contradicted himself on the witness stand, and was trying to get a reduced sentence. His testimony was not enough.
A stunning verdict this afternoon in the trial of 13 white supremacists.
The defendants were acquitted of all charges, every single one of them.
Thought we proved it beyond a reasonable doubt, but apparently we hadn't.
The defense attorneys said, how on earth could this ragtag group of people possibly overthrow the U.S. government? And that was a question that the federal prosecutors could never overcome.
The defendants left the courtroom triumphant and defiant.
1, I want to praise Yahweh's holy and precious name. 2, I want to say to hell with the federal government.
To kind of add insult to injury, one of the jurors actually married one of the defendants. The government had tried to destroy the radical right in America, and it failed abjectly.
Everybody knew it'd be a long time before the government would ever try that kind of thing again. That emboldened the right-wing movement a little bit more.
To avoid the attention of law enforcement, some in the movement embraced a different tactic, operating in small cells.
3 to 5 people. Even stronger is the lone wolf that communicates with nobody and can go out autonomously and do whatever.
We managed to dissolve the order. However, we didn't make any impact on the ideology. The ideology still existed all across this country.
April 19, 1995.
About a third of the building has been blown away.
A Ryder rental truck with 5,000 pounds of explosives ripped through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. 168 people were killed, 19 children among them.
I thought, who has come in here and done this terrible thing?
The film delves into the rise of white nationalist militias in the 1980s and 2 later events that galvanized the country and deeply influenced Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh.
It's the new thing in America. It's called the militia.
The siege of Ruby Ridge in 1992, when the FBI and U.S. Marshals confronted Randy Weaver at his home in rural Idaho, resulting in the deaths of Weaver's wife, son, and a U.S. Marshal. And the following year, Waco, Texas, when federal agents, responding to reports of weapons stockpiling, attempted to arrest the leader of a religious sect known as the Branch Davidians. A firefight broke out, killing 10, including 4 ATF agents. And after a 51-day standoff, the complex went up in flames as agents moved in with tear gas. More than 70 people died.
Just arrived today.
During the long standoff, then 24-year-old Army veteran Timothy McVeigh had been watching nearby.
Timothy McVeigh himself was not a member of a militia, but you're convinced that that context is the way to understand him?
Without question. He was steeped in the ideas of this movement. He was steeped in the ideology. It's a very diffuse movement, and being a member of a militia is really sort of irrelevant.
They had no idea who did it.
It shows how much confusion there was initially about who had carried it out, and the surprise when McVeigh was arrested.
I think everybody felt this sudden sense of betrayal. I think everyone thought, you're one of us.
I would say that this is a movement that waxes and wanes throughout American history and sort of appears in different forms, whether it's, going back to Shays' Rebellion at the beginning of the history of our country up through the Red Scare, the Klan years. There's a lot of different manifestations.
It took less than 2 hours before Timothy McVeigh was captured, pulled over by an Oklahoma State trooper.
He was stopped on a highway with a license plate that had fallen off.
The FBI had its man.
Am I pure evil? Am I the face of terror?
But he did not act alone. Within 48 hours, connections were made between McVeigh and an address in Kingman, Arizona.
We identified Michael and Lori Fortier.
McVeigh and Fortier served in the Army together. In fact, McVeigh was living with Fortier a few months before the bombing.
We sent SWAT team up there. We sent a bunch of investigators initially.
Kenneth Williams worked 30 years with the FBI. He was the special agent in charge of the Fortier investigation.
We had several hundred agents up there.
The FBI interviewed Fortier multiple times, more than a dozen hours, but his story remained the same.
I can't believe that he was going to do this. I had no knowledge that he was going to do that.
Top officials with the FBI believe Fortier, but Williams wasn't buying it.
You get a gut feeling sometimes.
Slowly but surely, he was finding holes in Fortier's story.
Michael Fortier was lying to his co-workers.
Search warrants of Fortier's trailer provided more evidence. More than 100 detonators were discovered by the home.
They would blow things up out in the Arizona desert.
The evidence was mounting. Williams interviewed Fortier again, this time showing him pictures of the victims. Many were kids.
He pushed away from the table and he said, "What about all the kids you guys killed in Waco, Texas?"
That is when Williams knew Fortier was involved in the bombing. But to what extent? Another picture would be the final piece of the puzzle. It was Michael's wife, Lori.
This was a picture where she was semi-naked.
Taken on a day Michael was at the Prescott VA hospital by none other than Timothy McVeigh.
And that broad was just staring at me like a goddamn double cheeseburger.
His question to me was, what kind of deal can you give me? I will give you everything.
She said that Brad told her Westfall and his crew, your crew, was responsible for the murders of the girls in Delphi and a fire that killed 2 girls.
Fortier may not have been in Oklahoma at the time of the bombing, But he and his wife likely knew what would happen.
I think, yes, he is just as responsible for the deaths of those people.
The federal government saw it differently. Given a plea deal, Fortier was sentenced to just 12 years. His wife granted immunity.
At the end of the day, I think he got probably one of the biggest deals I've ever seen in my professional career.
McVeigh is the epitome of the lone wolf. But even a lone wolf still has to be part of something that gets them to that point. When later asked about the 19 children that were killed, he said that he felt bad that that happened, but that was just part of the follow-on of war.
It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil.
I recently watched a movie called The Shack, and there's also a book that talks so well about evil, about death, and about eternity.
This is religion-based.
This is, and even though it's about forgiveness and faith, he doesn't say those words. He says evil, death, and eternity.
And I think the best part of this whole case right now is that he's suffering, he's freaking out, he's looking over his shoulder.
You've got every agency in the government coming out after people. That scares you. If you're in the movement, you start to see the reality of what could happen.
The government crackdown and the horror of the Oklahoma City attack helped lead to the decline of organized militias, many of which condemned the bombing. By the end of the 90s, they had all but disappeared.
People kind of go to ground, but the problems did not go away at all. It was still there, it just went underground a little bit.
I was only fighting by the rules of engagement that were introduced by the aggressor. Waco started this war. Hopefully Oklahoma would end it.
Urbeck says he picked Oklahoma City for a reason.
It was out there in the open, it could easily be seen, and he felt that it would make a very striking visual.
It's literally like the Globe Theater. This is actually the most wide open area of any of the woods surrounding here. It looks literally staged. This killer came here, dumped the bodies in an area where he wasn't particularly trying to conceal them. I think he was actually trying to present them in a certain way.
The discussions were about why did he do this? Where did he come from and who is he connected to?
And inside McVeigh's yellow Mercury sedan, investigators discovered a sealed envelope containing evidence that would prove crucial to analyzing McVeigh's motivations. Authorities never did tie the National Alliance to the Oklahoma City bombing, pinning the devastating crime on McVeigh and a few accomplices, including Terry Nichols and Michael Fortier. But it became clear that McVeigh's ties to white power groups ran deep.
They're brothers in arms, and that is, they're survivalists or quasi-survivalists, and I can get along with them real well.
Whether it was a Nazi, whether it was a white supremacist, whether it was a survivalist, whether it was a militiaman, he would have fully embraced their views.
Absolutely sad and tragic that most of us knew very little about the development of the movement. We didn't know how far the tentacles reached.
An organization out there called the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have a group of liberal, left-wing, hard-left activists who've been given power by the United States government to stand and point at anybody they want and say racist, terrorist, Nazi, whatever. If you don't believe in their ideologies, you're a hate group. And they have labeled the VSC that. Every single patriot group, pro-American group, pro-Constitution, not pro-government, pro-Constitution, they're all hate groups to these people.
6 months prior to the bombing in Oklahoma City, the Southern Poverty Law Center sent a letter to then Attorney General Janet Reno. And we talked about what we were seeing in terms of the threat from the anti-government movement. We just saw more and more of this kind of thing happening on the ground.
Will this prompt the United States or the government to take a new and a tougher look at the white supremacist groups, the hate groups, the militias? Is this going to trigger any kind of crackdown?
Let me say that we need to finish this investigation now.
I don't really think that there was an understanding of how much of a threat we were dealing with within our own country.
He's a former federal prisoner who now lives in Allendale with his family, but he denies he's part of any hate group. Have you seen the map of Michigan where it shows?
Yes, I have seen that.
The swastika in Grand Rapids.
Yes.
They're referring to your group, right?
Yes, they are.
The Southern Poverty Law Center identifies it as a neo-Nazi organization called the Gallows Tree Wotansvolk Alliance, one of 28 hate groups it identifies in Michigan.
The Southern Poverty Law Center gets a lot of profit from creating hate groups across the entire country.
6 months prior to the bombing in Oklahoma City, the Southern Poverty Law Center sent a letter to then Attorney General Janet Reno.
Peterson says his group with about 10 members in West Michigan has nothing to do with the Nazis.
We consider ourselves a tribe, but basically we are a religious group that follows the religion of Wotanism.
Okay. Is that a Nazi group?
No, it's a religion.
They called all of us neo-Nazis. They labeled us as the reason why Asatru, folkish, that we were the reason why we were given a bad name. Most of us have evolved from the 88 precepts. We still hold true to them, but we understand that this was just a format in which David Lane had attempted to give us something to grasp a hold of. And this group, Wotansvolk, took us when nobody else would, educated us when nobody else would. And here we are, 2017. Wotanist and Wotansvolk, same thing, but they talk to a mindset of a generation.
A religion, he says, that predates Christianity. So, you're not part of a white supremacist group, or...
we are not white supremacists.
The tattoo on his neck, he says, is not a swastika spin-off, but a shield from the side of a Viking ship.
That is what this is. This is a shield.
In the pose he strikes on his group's page is not, he says, a salute to Hitler, but a workout move.
This is what I'm doing right here.
And what is that?
It's a workout regime that I follow.
Oh, that super filtered, superimposed picture of me trying to look edgy is just me doing a workout regime I follow.
Then there's the mission statement on the Gallows Tree website about race and Aryan values, and the photograph on the webpage showing Peterson next to a man with a giant swastika tattoo on his chest.
It's a lot of witch hunting.
Peterson served nearly 9 years in federal prison for arson after setting fire in 1997 to a home on tribal land in Mount Pleasant. The feds extended his parole in 2009 for his alleged involvement with a white supremacist threat group that led to an FBI investigation. Federal prosecutors at the time said his religion promoted quote-unquote white pride.
White supremacy is trying to say, hey, that my people are better than your people for some known reason. I don't think I'm better than anybody.
Now, we wanted to ask the Southern Poverty Law Center how it determined the local group was neo-Nazi, but our calls were not returned.
Let's see if we can find any clues.
I want to show you some other things, all right? Let's see if I can turn this thing around. She's got a nice hammer. Look, this girl's got a nice hammer.
Wow, she's got bling in her.
Yeah. We bought this at the Celtic Festival in Michigan. We were with Ragnar and the kids. So that's a pretty little necklace. This is the mama, and she stays pregnant. Jeremy Bradman keeps her blonde and pregnant. There's the daddy. All right, there's the daddy. He keeps her blonde and pregnant. How's it, bro? How's it? Well, y'all know who this is. Michael Peterson. He's pretty famous for all of our books, writing. If you want to know what you got to do to become a member of Gallows Tree, you talk to him. You have him sign the books. Have him sign the books. Heathen Hearth. Underneath the pen name Ragnar White Sun. Get the book Heathen Hearth, and then you can find out what you got to do. Brian Markley, we love you. Thanks for coming out yesterday. Kondo, we love you. Kondo, Hilda, Sean Boy, Chester Doles, we love you. Fort Wayne is in the house.
The tree.
Yeah.
The Pagan Pride Festival in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Representing big muscles, and I have a set of glasses, right? And look at this big old guy. Don't wrestle him or throw a cabler contest with him. I heard he could throw one like 19 meters, and I don't even know how the fuck far that is. But don't do it. Up. And here's the Vinlander.
Vinlanders.
Here's a Vinlander from Minnesota. Welcome. Good time.
Good hospitality right here, good brother.
Hey, glad you can come down, glad you can be with us.
I feel at home here with you guys.
And we totally appreciate it. Much love, much respect.
Absolutely.
And we come from the same cloth.
Yes.
And, it dates back to our ancestors. And
our grandmothers and grandfathers from way back, ancient times.
Ancient times.
Absolutely.
Bird Force.
Love you, man.
Love you, bro. There's baby Freya, and Rocky, and Wolf, and look at that baby Freya. Yes!
Last time I was here, I left my sweatshirt and red shoes.
What color is it?
Black.
What color black?
Black.
Light black? Black black?
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Brown black? Gray black? There's a bunch of different kinds.
You know, in Alaska, they had like 27 different colors for white. What color of black is he talking about? I mean, there's some blacks.
Black.
To the white power movement, violence is a means to an end, something that Kelvin Pierce says was ingrained in his upbringing.
It was just monkey see, monkey do.
At the same time, across the country,
maximum violence upon them.
The white power movement, far from the spotlight of authorities, continued to add followers.
All right, y'all, here comes another crash course quickie to help us make sense of this. A reconstruction of the Viking-era Norse pantheon, Odinism plays a vital role in the world of the radical right. Odinism today is interchangeable with Asatru. Devotees of the same Norse pantheon tend to eschew the overtly racist reconstructions of their tradition, concentrating instead on the ritual and magical elements central to all Wiccan and pagan religions. Odinists practice an imaginative blend of ritual magic, ceremonial forms of fraternal fellowship, and an ideological flexibility that allows for a remarkable degree of syncretism with other white supremacist appeals, National Socialism in particular. Ironically, Odinists tend to subscribe to a number of beliefs that are explicitly Christian. Anti-Semitism, for example, would have puzzled the pagan-era Norse, as would the various conspiratorial fantasies that are ubiquitous among the radical right. Although Odinism's precise origins are far from clear, its intellectual roots lie in the world of such 19th and early 20th century German occultists as Guido von List, George Lohmer, and Rudolf von Sabbatendorf, as well as in such occult groups as the Edda Society. Leaders in this movement would go on to influence the likes of Elsie Christensen, Steve McNallen, and on some level, every leader of the white power movement. Of more direct organizational impact on the modern Odinist movement, however, was the profound social and political crisis that engulfed Germany in the chaotic period of the Weimar Republic. In this time of intermingled chaos and decadence, wandering groups of displaced or simply disillusioned German youth, known collectively as the German Youth Movement, began, perhaps as a lark, perhaps with more serious intent, to make sacrifices to Wotan. In the Nazi era, many of these young people would give up their wanderings for the excitement of helping to build the Third Reich. The old gods were hardly alien to the architects of the Third Reich, and eccentric literature has grown up around the mystical endeavors of leading figures in the Nazi Party. As Hitler was rising to power in Germany, the occult implications of German National Socialism were gaining the attention of mystics outside of Germany. One such, an Australian named Alexander Red Mills, was an unabashed Nazi sympathizer and a believer in a form of racial mysticism that posited pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon society as the golden age of the British people. In the 1930s, Mills began to turn his dreams towards the reconstruction of that perfect time in this degenerate age. Mills' diagnosis held that the contemporary malady of civilization was the result of the malign influence of the Jews, and because Christianity was built on the foundation of Judaic thought, it had to be severed from the soul of the descendants of the Anglo-Saxon race. Out of this process of reasoning came Mills' first and most influential book, The Odinist Religion, Overcoming Jewish Christianity. It was the first of a number of writings, but it is the most revealing of the gradual process through which he attempted to disengage his thought from the deeply ingrained paradigms of the dominant Christian culture. Mills would win few converts to his Anglican Church of Odin, but his writings would be kept alive in the world of the right-wing publishing houses. It was in this milieu that Mills would be discovered by Elsie Christensen and her late husband Alex in the early 1960s, during the course of reading such right-wing staples as Yoki's Imperium and Spengler's Decline of the West. But it was Mills who would inspire the widowed Elsie Christensen to form the Odinist Fellowship. The first issue of the Fellowship's journal, The Odinist, coincided with the discovery of the Norse pantheon by other seekers, most notably Steve McNallen, who would at virtually the same time found the Asatru Free Assembly. The heady combination of National Socialism, the occult, the Viking mystique, and the quest for community proved irresistible to others as well. Of these, perhaps most revealing of the processes by which these racialist adherents seek to exploit the Norse Germanic revival are the activities of George Dietz. A German immigrant and longtime figure in American neo-Nazi circles, Dietz took note of the revival of Odinist groups around the United States. Through one of his younger associates, Ron Hand, Dietz created the Odinist Study Group as a front for his own National Socialist movement. Hand, operating under his own name in Odinist affairs and the name Reinhold Dunkel in National Socialist circles, enjoyed complete autonomy as leader of the group. By the late 1970s or early 1980s, Dietz had come to realize that Germany was probably dead to a possible National Socialist revival and imagined that the last hope for a Nazi resurgence was the United States. Odinism, he reasoned, might be the engine for a future National Socialist America. The original plan appears to have been to gather a list of local Odinist groups, to infiltrate, and turn gradually towards National Socialism. This plan was not carried out, as Dietz decided to sell his mailing list to other groups, of which the Odinist Study Group was a part. This had the ironic effect of bringing the Odinist Study Group to life. That life consisted of a mail-order kindred, in which the inclusion of the Odinist Study Group's address in certain right-wing lists, especially those of Joseph Dilly's in Chicago, brought in a number of seekers from across the country, many of them in prison. Losing interest in Odinism, Hand eventually began to direct letters to the Odinist Study Group, to Mike Murray of the Asatru Alliance. In the late 1980s, with the discovery that the leader of the Order, Bob Matthews, was an Odinist, as was Core Order member David Lane, the question of violence is one that must be addressed in relation to contemporary Odinism. Throughout the 1980s, many Odinist upstarts conducted an important outreach ministry in the prisons where Odinism competes with Christian identity for the allegiance of white racialist prisoners. Skinheads, too, have increasingly turned to Odinism, and Odinist lyrics and artistic motives by the 1990s had become prominent features of white power music. Elsie Christensen, the founder of the first organized racialist Odinist organization in the United States, saw her mission as one of diffusing this potential violence, particularly among her prison constituency. In 1993, Christensen was arrested and sent to prison after being caught in a car filled with marijuana. The car belonged to one of her less successfully rehabilitated alumni of the prison system. In the end, her refusal to testify was the cause of her incarceration. Soon after her imprisonment, she gave the Odinist Fellowship's mailing list to Steve McNallen as the basis for his present-day organization, the Asatru Folk Assembly. Steve McNallen is one of the most famous names in American heathenry. Following the collapse of the Asatru Free Assembly, McNallen traveled the world writing for Soldier of Fortune magazine before founding the Asatru Folk Assembly with Elsie Christensen's mailing list. McNallen's time in South Africa would have a profound impact on his form of racialized heathenry in the years to come. Upon returning to the United States in 1994 from his travels abroad, McNallen began promoting many concepts central to the Africana nationalism as if they are inseparable from Asatru itself. McNallen uses the AFA as a support base and megaphone to blur the line between fascist, radical traditionalist politics, and heathen spirituality. His story is powerful, compelling, and a carefully crafted myth. He has actively worked to advance his brand of heathenry by concealing it behind a mask of twisted heritage and falsified traditions. While overtly denouncing racism, McNallen argues for many key elements of racialist, white nationalist, and separatist ideology. Asatru Folk Assembly's Declaration of Purpose bears considerable resemblance to the central tenets of one of the key figures in the development of Africana nationalism in South Africa, who argued for a nationalism of separate, unique national identities as created by God. The argument was that it was necessary for divinely mandated nations to maintain their cultural and linguistic purity. To the Afrikaners, entire groups were predestined by God for paradise or damnation. If any of the groups stray, all suffer, making it the responsibility of the whole of the community to work for salvation by shunning, expelling, enslaving, or even killing those who threaten their prospect of heavenly reward. These values of racial superiority, communal salvation, and ethno-nationalism formed the basis of the South African apartheid regime, one of many examples used by modern white supremacists to validate their arguments. In many ways, Boer separatism fits quite well with the admirable, glowing words McNallen uses to describe Afrikaner resistance movement's paramilitary training. They were good people, and they were the bastion of European culture on the African continent. Their insistent Christianity cannot conceal the truth that they are a wandering Germanic tribe. The fact that they confuse the God of the Bible with Wotan does not keep them from being a part of the great northern family whose way we follow. In 1997, McNallen married Sheila Edlund. Michael Murray, also known as Valgard Murray, performed the ceremony, blessing the new couple while Blood Axis frontman Michael Moynihan performed for guests. Valgard Murray first became involved in the racialist scene in the late 1960s, when he first came into contact with Odinism, following a stint with George Lincoln Rockwell's short-lived Odinist ministry through the American Nazi Party. In the 1970s, Murray would co-found the Arizona Kindred with Elton Hall, the man who had first introduced him to Odinism and the American Nazi Party's state organizer. In 1976, the Arizona Kindred would become the first kindred to be certified by Elsie Christensen's Odinist Fellowship, with Murray later serving as organization's vice president. The old AFA, as it is now known, was kicked off by a dispute over what to do about the kindred in Arizona, who included open neo-Nazis. The debate steadily split the AFA into two camps: those who supported excluding anyone from the community who was not of proven Germanic descent, and those who welcomed all interested seekers. The tensions of the debate would lead to the AFA dissolving sometime between 1986 and 1987. As the schism in the Asatru Free Assembly was gaining momentum, McNallen would write and publish the document that would be the foundation of his form of heathen practice, metagenetics. Following the collapse of the old AFA, Murray partnered with Tribe of the Wolfings founder Robert Taylor to found the Asatru Alliance in 1988. The structure of the Asatru Alliance was based on the system used by outlaw biker gangs of hang-around kindreds, probationary kindreds, and full members. Not surprising considering Murray's past history as a spokesperson for the National Socialist Iron Cross Outlaw Motorcycle Club. Within the Odinist community itself, the justification for the resort to force in defense of the race has been encapsulated by David Lane's 14 words. With this formulation, the recourse to violence is both justified and encouraged. Such violence has largely been episodic in the province of Odinist skinheads, indulging in street violence with little planning and less justification. David Lane dreamed of a revolution imbued with the violence needed to cleanse the earth of the corruption he sees as inherent in modern multiracial society. Lane's Odinist writings provide the most clearly articulated Odinist theology of violence. Based on his pedigree as a member of the Order, Lane's writings are becoming ubiquitous throughout the milieu of the radical right. This gives his pronouncements an authority that extends far beyond the narrow confines of the Odinist community. Lane's discourse employs the image of the white warrior and the revolutionary as a Wotan, a god on earth. This imagery fits well with the leaderless resistance concept of lone wolf actions. And for those who decide to take the lonely course of the Wotan, David Lane's advice is succinct. Death to traitors. In particular, if you are a white male who commits race treason, the day is coming when you will be visited by Wotan. Your demise will be unpleasant. Judges, lawyers, bankers, real estate agents, Judeo-Christian preachers, federal agents, and other assorted treasonous swine, take note. Wotan is coming. Your wealth, your homes, your women, and your lives are at risk when you commit treason. Pray that you die quickly. One day, Wotan will feed your repulsive carcasses to the vultures and bury your bones under outhouses that our folk may forever pay fitting tribute to your memory. That day is called Ragnarok. Random acts of brutal, senseless violence within various groups remains a never-ending headache for movement leaders who are inexplicably shocked every time one of the rage-fueled weirdos their hate-fueled community attracts commits another seemingly isolated atrocity. James Mason is among leaders like McNallen who find themselves in the position time and time again of losing control of one of their rabid dogs trained for war only to pull off a senseless act of brutality. One could argue their common struggle dates back to their own formative years in the movement, influenced by the same circle of jerks who would go on to play significant roles in cross-pollinating various extremist movements in the next decades. Moynihan is a well-known member of the modern neo-fascist movement. As the face of the neo-fascist group Blood Axis, Moynihan is a longtime member of the American New Right. Contrary to the usual stereotype, Moynihan is a slick intellectual operator. Aside from his role as the frontman for Blood Axis and his work on other neo-fascist musical acts, Moynihan works to help disseminate neo-fascist thought. In 1992, he edited and provided the introduction for the book Siege, a collection of the writings of neo-Nazi James Mason. He followed up in 1995 with the publication of Lords of Chaos, a book about the black metal subculture. In it, he argues the entire subculture was an expression of the suppressed atavistic archetypes of the Nordic psyche. Moynihan has continued to focus on the more mystical elements, working on the translation of The Secret King, Himmler's Lord of the Runes, written by Heinrich Himmler's personal occultist. He also edited a translation of Julius Evola's Men Among Ruins. Evola is an Italian fascist philosopher whose works are the foundation of modern radical traditionalism and a particular favorite who shows up much more frequently in Moynihan's later projects. In his later work with Joshua Buckley at the Radical Traditionalist Journal Tier, Julius Evola's writings are a staple along with the works of Alain de Benoit. All 3 volumes of Tier's issue collections are available at the AFA's online store in the books section, as McNallen contributed to Volume 2. Somewhere in this fringe area of Weirdosville was the bridge between the Manson wing of the white power movement and the racist misogynist wing, which opened the floodgates to the worst kinds of cross-pollination, where the sickest of freaks who don't make the cut to become warriors end up going out into society to unleash rage that becomes another forgotten tragedy filed away under, we can never really understand the logic of a sick killer, so why even try? As if we have to be able to relate to them in order to recognize the intricacies they live by when we see it. A brief history of the Vinlanders Social Club. After busting onto the skinhead scene in 2003, the VSC rapidly gained notice with their Take It to the Extreme crew of renegade skins. Carrying on the vendetta of its predecessor, the VSC openly challenged the long-standing dominance of the Hammerskin Nation. This brazen defiance, along with the VSC's wild partying, exotic Odinist rituals, and penchant for brutality, ensured the VSC was known far and wide in the white supremacist underworld, of which its ranks began to swell. The first meeting of the National Skinhead Council was held in 2005 on the Ohio property of a Blood and Honor / Combat 18 member. More than a dozen white supremacist groups, mostly skinhead crews, but also the Imperial Clans of America and the Neo-Nazi National Alliance were in attendance. By the close of business, the coalition decided to call itself Council 28, 2 standing for B representing blood and 8 for H, meaning honor. On Memorial Day in 2006, the VSC held the 2nd annual Nordic Hate Rock Fest at the Imperial Clans of America compound in Kentucky. Fairburn and James posed for a photo mocking Hammerskin Nation by holding its flag upside down. Shortly after, Steve Boswell of the National Socialist Movement took the stage to tell the crowd that the white supremacist movement couldn't succeed by belonging to a social club where all we do is drink and shoot the shit every Saturday night. The Vinlanders, rightfully assuming the comment was directed at their social club, took offense. As soon as Boswell left the stage, VSC members beat the shit out of him as his wife and 10-year-old daughter watched in horror. The assault buttressed the Vinlanders' take-no-prisoners reputation, while the older white supremacists clutched their pearls over the white-on-white violence. By 2007, the Vinlanders had 8 chapters in 6 states, but an unhinged attack in downtown Indianapolis in March, committed by Fairburn, fellow Vinlanders Tim Dumas and Josh Kern, signaled a reversal in the group's fortunes. According to police reports and media accounts, a man named Dexter Lewis passed a sidewalk table occupied by Vinlanders, and he commented to Fairburn, "Nice tattoo." It's unclear which tattoo he meant, as Fairburn had quite a few, including the word murder etched across his neck. In any case, Fairburn didn't take the remark as a compliment, and he threatened Lewis, saying, "Don't you dare stop." Lewis kept going, but within a few minutes, Fairburn, Dumas, and Kern tracked him down at a nearby intersection and proceeded to brutalize him. Undeterred by the large crowd of witnesses that had gathered, one of the Vinlanders yelled at a spectator who tried to stop the attack, "Back off, or you'll get a piece of this too." Another of the trio told a woman on his cell phone, "If you call 911, I'll kill you." All 3 psychos were arrested a short time later. Dumas pled guilty to a felony charge of criminal recklessness and was sentenced to a year in prison. Kern pled guilty to misdemeanor battery and received 60 days. Fairburn, the ringleader in the attack, was sentenced to 5 years in prison with 3 years suspended. Shackled and handcuffed, Fairburn did his best to sound contrite during his sentencing hearing, respectfully answering "yes ma'am" and "no ma'am" to the black judge peering down on him from the bench. When she announced that she was barring him from associating with skinheads or any other white supremacists as a condition of a suspended sentence, Fairburn didn't hesitate to renounce the Vinlanders in open court. "I'm no longer a member of the Vinlanders, and I no longer have any association or ties whatsoever with the VSC or any other racist clubs or anything," Fairburn said. "I haven't been around those people in over a year. I'm 34 years old, and I've got too much going on in my life to waste any more of it. When I decided to get out, I grabbed as many people as I could and I ran for the door. Anybody who I thought I could talk some sense into, I did, and a few quit along with me." In fact, several longtime members did quit, in some cases joining outlaw motorcycle gangs, while the majority of others would end up arrested on their own criminal charges. Due to surmounting pressure from the obscenely degenerate fuckwads the group was comprised of, Brian James announced the VSC was planning to separate itself from the racialist movement. He added, "We've attempted to change this movement from within and have not succeeded. It's our opinion that a large number of the people involved in the greater movement are paid informants, social outcasts, and general losers in life." In 2009, Michael Parrish, Vinlanders probate, is arrested on charges of murdering his girlfriend and their 18-month-old son. Photographs taken during his arraignment revealed a black band with the number 22 tattooed above his right elbow for Firm 22.
Support club, man. Firm 22, letter V. It's just our support club.
Despite more than a dozen racist tattoos, including Hitler and block lettering on his left forearm, Parrish was employed as a correctional officer at the Monroe County Correctional Facility. A search of the apartment where the murders occurred turned up a large cache of neo-Nazi memorabilia, firearms, and sculptures of twigs and branches fashioned into a life rune. In 2010, the Phoenix New-Times reported more than a dozen members or associates of the VSC in that region had been arrested in the previous year, essentially wiping them out in Arizona. 2 of the reputed members, Travis Ricci and Aaron Schmidt, were indicted for the drive-by shotgun slaying of a white woman walking at night with her African-American boyfriend.
Brad told her that Westfall and his crew had friends in several states and they have no problem killing race traitors, and asked her to clarify race traitor, and she said she believed it meant white people who mix with other races.
Another Vinlander was later arrested and charged with trying to intimidate a witness in Ritchie and Schmidt's case. After being released from prison for his Indianapolis assault, Fairburn turned himself into police and confessed to the 2004 murder of a man in Springfield, Missouri. In May of 2011, Ritchie was sentenced in another case to 22 years for bashing his girlfriend's head into a wall at a party and stabbing the 2 men who came to her aid, one in the hand, the other in the neck. The VSC suffered another major blow when Byron Widener, one of the group's founders and most prominent members, renounced his racist beliefs and underwent a painful process of removing his facial tattoos. The VSC was officially disbanded by Brian James, who went on to form the Soldiers of Odin in 2014. After countless Soldiers of Odin chapters found themselves on watch lists for crime and terrorism, Brian James tried rebranding his next dumpster fire project in 2016 as a totally benign patriotic organization, but it retained many of the same extremist views and connections as the VSC. The American Guard tries to promote nationalism as pro-constitution and traditional values, but it was founded in 2016 by Brian James. James claims he renounced his racist past and that the American Guard is open to people of all races and religions. They claim to have chapters in more than 20 states and to support the constitutional rights of Americans, especially the right to bear arms and the right to free speech. But just like the Vinlanders, they represent and operate as a single entity.
How many men have a guy they can call at 3 a.m.? But I talk about the difference between a 6 p.m. friend and a 3 a.m. friend. So there are guys that you can call or text until about 6 p.m. And if you need to, help moving something or you need some advice, like they're available until about 6. And after that, I'm just too busy. Then there's the guys that at 3 a.m. you're calling them. Not only do you know that they're going to answer, but you're going to hear in the background them getting on their pants, clicking their, pistol in the appendix position and grabbing a shovel because they assume that we're burying a body. Right, that's just what they assume, and they're down to help you.
One thing I like to say, everybody here has got all this skinhead, hate monger, crap towards me. As far as I can tell from my phone interview on here, I never said a damn thing about white nationalists. I never said them little black girls. Nothing about color ever came out of my mouth as far as I can remember. And if I'm wrong, somebody correct me, man, because I don't mind being corrected.
We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. This sentence was coined by David Lane, a great fighter for the white race. He coined this slogan when he was doing a life sentence in prison because he decided to take the fight to the enemies of our race.
So quick to point out things like that and say that crap about me. A lot of you focus on color way more than I do. White nationalists. I was there with the VSC, just literally trying to keep people that was marching through Indianapolis in support of the person they chose politically, trying to help keep them from getting busted in the head with sticks by a bunch of cowards in black outfits and face masks on.
The reason we wear the mask is because we represent the ideal of National Socialism. We wear the mask because it erases our individual identity and absorbs it into the collectivity of the nation. We are representing our ideal and our nation, not us as selfish individuals. That is fundamentally why we wear the black mask.
I tracked down this guy, a former skinhead who we'll call Scott.
What's your take on Soldiers of Odin?
They're definitely taking a bit from over here, like you said, with the rockers, patches on their jackets. It kind of definitely looks like bikers.
Scott was a leader deep in the white supremacy movement for over a decade. He got out just over 5 years ago.
And they're taking a bit of the ideology from the Odinism and white supremacy. Like,
Odinism was in a terrorism report by the RCMP.
Right.
Odin, a reference to the Norse god of war, is a symbol used by some white supremacists. And Odinism has been named by the RCMP when tracking violent groups in North America.
They say they're not racists. What do you think about that? Do you think that's true?
Do we have a use for them? I think not.
So you think it's bullshit?
Absolutely. For me, it's like they're saying, okay, we're not racist, but our ideology comes from a guy who was in racist gangs in Europe. But we're not. Then you might want to call your group something else then.
I will defend my race. We white people face numerous threats to our future. I will fight for my race, primarily with words and ideas, but I will fight more literally if I have to. I did not know the word Asatru. And I went over to the library to try and find some scholarly books on the subject, the college library, and there was almost nothing. And it started on that very primitive level, that utterly non-intellectual level, and over time matured into something more finessed, more scholarly informed, to put it mildly.
We do truly believe the gods and goddesses are approachable and that they are entities that have spirit and can commune with us. We gather in a circle like our ancestors always have. The horn to us represents all the deeds of the past, what we call Urlog, that everything goes in.
So it's really been a multiplicity of different, kind of sources that have helped promote neo-paganism and its association with the white supremacist movement. It's most closely linked to kind of the proto-fascists prior to World War II, and then of course more recently into the 70s and especially in the 80s, racist skinhead groups become pretty oftentimes associated with neo-paganism. The way I think about white nationalism, it's a branding strategy, or brand themselves in ways that sound more innocuous, less threatening. They talk about loving their race, not hating anyone. That's very common.
I think we are concerned about the long-term prospects for our people. We see more and more homogenization. We see more and more lack of concern for what to us is very, very primal issues. I mean, this is that's my
Here his 8 words.
That's my 8 words. You know, the existence of my people is not negotiable.
I think anytime you have a group or an organization promoting this type of racial exclusivity, my next question would be, well, who are their members, right? Who are the people that are attending? And what are they all about? Are they inclined towards violence?
I don't know any cases, any cases where our people have initiated violence.
Of course there are acts of violence someplace. There's hundreds of millions of people in our country. But in general,
anybody who comes in and starts talking accelerationist stuff.
What do you mean accelerationist?
Accelerationist is a term that's used to describe people who actively want to like start a race war or something like that. They want to be the primer that sets off the bomb, you know. And
have you had those people try to show up?
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm. And
it's important to underscore that a lot of what we see with these groups is a kind of front and backstage behavior. So what happens on the front stage is kind of PR, public relations. The question is what's happening on the backstage?
The real Vinland was a short-lived Viking colony in the 10th century on the east coast of Canada.
The myth of Vinland gives a lot of folks with this Germanic obsession a sort of authentic claim to North America, to say that they were actually the original colonists, that this is naturally their land.
But today, a fantasy of Vinland has become central to dangerous neo-pagan movements on the far right, in which elements of Viking mythology, religion, and history are co-opted and bastardized to drive an extreme white nationalist agenda.
Here, I'm a Viking. We brought him over here. Come on, we got prior land claims. Constitution, that ain't...
This is how neo-pagans pretending to be modern Vikings are fueling the far right and inspiring deadly violence.
Die, bitch. Fucking die.
Broadly defined, paganism refers to religious traditions that believe that nature is sacred and whose followers may worship multiple gods. And to be very clear, most people who practice modern paganism are not neo-fascists. But there's a powerful movement on the far right to rebrand bits of pre-Christian European religious belief, like worshipping ancient Norse gods such as Thor or Odin, as the original religion of white people, and distorting them to energize extremist movements.
Their belief, for example, with Nordic neo-paganism is that this was a belief system that emerged naturally in those places, that wasn't affected by colonization or Christianity. And frankly, telling the story that you're part of a warrior people with a god inside you is just a lot more energizing than just making political arguments.
You can see this influence running directly from neo-pagan elements of the Nazi Party to mass killers like Anders Breivik, who, when he murdered 77 people in Norway in 2011, named his rifle after Odin's spear.
It's about a search for authenticity, about saying that the modern world is sort of decadent, degenerate. It's about identity formation. It's about finding something that belongs to them that doesn't belong to the rest of the world. And so they're trying something new.
The outlaw is now an individual who has scorned the world and its golden calves. He adheres to the abundant explanations of natural law to inform his Weltanschauung.
Paul Wagner is the founder of a neo-pagan group called the Wolves of Vinland. Based in Virginia, it serves as a vehicle for Wagner's Norse mythology meets self-help program, Operation Werewolf.
I run Operation Werewolf, which is a program of total life reform.
Founded in 2016, Operation Werewolf offers a mix of fight training, inane self-improvement slogans, and neo-pagan ritual, all on a subscription model paid to Wagner himself.
What a ritual is really is a tuning fork. It creates a resonance for us that we can then bring ourselves into tune with in order to make sure that we are in harmony with the ideas and concepts that we want at our core.
The Wolves of Vinland gather in the woods to conduct pagan ceremonies, including animal sacrifice. though very often their output boils down to workout videos and cringy, juvenile, toxic masculinity.
Listen, why don't you go find a fucking big-ass football player to wrap his powerful arms around you and fucking smash you to pieces, because that's what it sounds like you want. It sounds like you want a boyfriend.
Wagner's usually careful to pitch his ideology as tribalist, rather than explicitly racist. However, the Wolves of Vinland have been classified as a hate group, and the links to the far right are pretty clear.
We long for tribe, strong connections with our peer group and families by blood or oath.
When a group like the Wolves of Vinland refers to themselves as a tribalist, what they mean is that they want members to meet a certain physical requirement, but they also want them to be of the correct descent, because they believe that only people of Germanic descent can actually commune with those gods.
The meaning a man seeks has always been, from the dawn of time, to join a cult of heroes.
One of their members was imprisoned in 2012 for committing an arson attack on a black church. Operation Werewolf also happens to be the name of a covert Nazi military program in World War II.
The reality is that they have a focused racist idea at their absolute core, and there's no way to disentangle that. And the core of those ideas is always going to be racialized violence. That is always running at the center of this, and there's no way to detach their quote-unquote ethnic consciousness from the violence that it pervades.
Wagner's devotion to this neo-pagan, white nationalist ideology is literally written across his body. His tattoos include designs based on pagan symbols that have long been co-opted by the far right, some of which can be spotted at far-right rallies across the world.
Virginia State Police declared a local emergency in Charlottesville, Virginia, Saturday. This is after violent protests broke out at what was supposed to be a white nationalist rally.
One of the most interesting aspects of racist neo-paganism is how it comes into conflict with white supremacy's other major religious impulse, Christian nationalism.
You got a problem with what I'm saying? All you Christians and Muslims and Jews. Die.
That was Jeremy Christian again, recorded the day before his racist attack in Portland. While it's not unusual to hear white supremacists spewing hate at Jews or Muslims, hearing them threaten or criticize Christians is a lot rarer.
Head of the Catholic Church is anti-white, anti-Western civilizations.
Pagan nationalists define themselves strictly along ethnic lines. Their movement is for white people only. So the idea that people of any race can become Christian is obviously against everything they stand for.
Replace all the white people that have been Christians with Africans or with South Americans or whatever, or Asians even, or something like that.
So it's very much about creating this sort of mystical sense of who white people are, and that simply has more traction for them because Christianity is the universal religion. And so if all people are equal in Christ, it's a lot harder to have those strong barriers that say this is a particular people, they're separate, they have a separate history, separate heroes, and a separate moral life.
For far-right neo-pagans like the alt-right influencer Lana Locktev, it seems that their main problem with Christianity is that it's just a bit too Jewish.
And these are things that are built into us, into humanity. Like, we know what right and wrong is. We didn't have to wait for essentially some Jews to show up in the desert to give us our moral code. That's very insulting. It's very insulting.
I think a really important point that gets lost a lot is the level of anti-Semitism that's implicit in these racialized pagan groups. They see Christianity as based off of the worship of a foreign Semitic Jewish god.
This appropriation and distortion of pagan mythologies actually has a pretty long history on the far right. The Nazis heavily pushed neo-pagan ideas of a pre-Christian German identity in their genocidal ideology, and their elite SS Corps used reimagined versions of ancient runes in its iconography and based its initiation ceremonies on reconstructed pagan rituals.
There's this long history of using these symbols going back to Nazi Germany and the appropriation of runic symbols. There are still observable patterns that we see, symbols, statements, iconography that continues to surface and pop up in extremely important and terrifying situations.
Much of these neo-pagan fascist movements are based less on deep historical knowledge of medieval Scandinavian society and more on cartoonish representations of Vikings in popular culture.
Part of this turn to both white supremacy and neo-paganism is trying to reassert some sort of meanings. They want some sort of glory narrative about themselves. They want to feel important in certain ways.
What racist Nordic paganism gives people is an emotional, spiritual, philosophical weight to these racist ideas. It's what's necessary to make these ideas take hold in people's lives. It's what's necessary to help them build a history and a sense of themselves. But it's very clear what their ideas actually do. And you can see the effect that these ideas have had on the white nationalist movement and on the people involved. And I think it's a straight line to acts of violence.
It's easy to dismiss them as your typical extremist, as disturbed or fringe. The reality is, however, we can no longer ignore them and hope they'll go away. It's not just about how popular these ideas are and someone like Andrew Anglin is, it's about a movement that we see growing, online and offline. Since 2012, American white nationalist groups have seen their Twitter followers grow by more than 600%. The history of the United States is full of extremism and organized hate. From the Know Nothing movement of the 19th century to the KKK to the neo-Nazi skinhead gangs of the 1980s. What makes the alt-right different, and in some ways more dangerous, is its ability to radicalize people from behind computer screens. The alt-right uses the anonymity of chat rooms and message boards to recruit young men online and expose them to toxic ideas. Eventually, these young men end up embracing them. When you're anonymous online, you can get away with almost anything. It's what allows them to recruit widely. It allows them to spread their propaganda in ways that white nationalist groups never could in the past. They grew in the shadows for years, and now they're here, and we have to deal with them. If we don't pay attention to these new radicals preaching hate, misogyny, and fascism from the dark corners of the internet, and yes, preaching violence too, their movement is likely to become more extreme and more dangerous.
Atomwaffen traces its origins to Iron March, a now defunct internet forum for neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other members of the extreme right. In 2015, Brandon Russell, then a teenager living in Florida, used Iron March as a training ground for recruitment and propaganda. Using the screen name Odin, Russell attracted followers for the group, which he named the Atomwaffen Division. Many young people came into contact with AWD via online video game communities and were radicalized as they engaged with more and more extremist content over time.
The young generation are like absolutely depressed. Politics is a mess. So, you know, it almost was the perfect storm to come in and say to young lads, look, accelerate, let's destroy. We're angry, let's show everybody we're angry. It's like meet at Fascist Forge, like find your mutuals, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then move on to encrypted apps when they want to talk about like who they want to kill.
Their chat groups have basically got people from all over the world. There's no borders.
It takes like, frankly, nerds like us to be in it, to be like, we'll talk till like 4 in the morning, like looking at the most tiniest detail.
These groups want to destroy society so they can take power. Ethnic minorities, women, and gay people are all targets in their ideology of chaos and destruction.
James Mason's writings form the apocalyptic heart of the group's core tenets, otherwise known as siege culture. Siege culture is a philosophy, political orientation, and spiritual outlook dominated by hate and anchored in fascist ideology. Adherents are urged to drop out of society to undermine it.
They love any like social distress, anything that's like messed up in society, they love it.
They want to collapse society.
They want to collapse, yeah, they're a collapse cult. It's not your granddad's Nazism, it's not like, you know, jack boots, it's not like running around like skinheads. It's very different.
Atomwaffen members have a fascination with Charles Manson. Required and recommended reading include books that promote a particular version of Satanism known as the Order of Nine Angles, which is steeped in neo-Nazism and neo-paganism.
They not only want to form terrorist cell structures, they also want to inspire others to go out and commit lone actor acts of terror.
I speak to a family torn apart by their violence.
I'm really concerned with the young and mid-teens, the propensity towards violence and the fascination with violence.
As the extreme right stands accused of helping to stoke racial tension in the States, I'm on the hunt for leaders of the network who hide in the shadows online.
The main question is, does he understand
how much damage he's caused.
Blaise Bernstein went missing in January 2018. 22-year-old Sam Woodward, who'd known Blaise since high school, has been charged with his murder and is due to stand trial soon. Woodward has pleaded not guilty. He's alleged to have belonged to a neo-Nazi group that's been linked to 5 murders in the States called Atomwaffen Division. It's connected to a UK-based group, the Sonnenkrieg Division, that was banned earlier this year.
I was completely ignorant that these things were really a thing. It was right under our noses and we had no idea. And with the way that we have social media now and the way that we connect with each other through iPhones, it's so seamless now and so easy to connect with things that are really fringe, very extreme.
Until a few years ago, extreme right-wing groups like National Action were very visible on Britain's streets. Now the neo-Nazi movement is online and underground, hiding behind aliases to form networks and add to their ranks. I wanted to delve deeper into this dark world. I created fake identities so I could search online platforms and join groups in encrypted messaging apps undetected. In this online world, many roads lead to the website Fascist Forge, where extremist Italo met and befriended the Durham teenager. Police interest prompted the man behind the site to take it down earlier this year. He calls himself Matthias. He says he's 25 and lives in Los Angeles. I want to know who he really is. I call another journalist contact called Ali Winston, who knows the LA scene well.
At first I was looking at it because it kind of overlapped with some of the more traditional elements in California's gang culture. A couple of years back, it was a different group of people, more people who were suburban, middle class, very young, high schoolers, and educated too. There have been quite a number of murders, assaults, shootings.
Footage of the murders was promoted on the Fascist Forge website. Its founder, Matthias, like the killer himself, hell-bent on accelerating the destruction of society. I could see that Matthias had been promoting something else on Fascist Forge too, a militant group called The Base. The FBI says its aim is to incite a race war and unite white supremacists around the globe. If Matthias is involved, it's a big lead in my hunt to unmask him.
The Base is interesting. They've kind of positioned themselves as an umbrella organization over other groups in that far-right sphere.
Police say the 3 men arrested in Georgia had trained at a camp for the white supremacist group known as The Base.
In January, 3 members of the group were charged with plotting to kill 2 anti-fascists. Earlier this year, I tracked down the founder and leader of The Base in Russia.
Lone wolf attacks or lone wolf operations are not.
The 47-year-old had been using an alias and claimed to have worked for the US security services. I discovered his real name, Ronaldo Nazzaro. He directed The Base from his upmarket flat in St. Petersburg.
We all believe that there's no saving the system now. So the best option for us is to see it fall, see it collapse. I mean, even if it's just like on a localized level.
Nazzaro didn't know it, but his secretive organization had been infiltrated. This year, covert recordings of how it recruits were leaked to US civil rights organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center. The recordings, which haven't been broadcast before, reveal Ronaldo Nazzaro trying to influence and groom would-be recruits. He encourages them to read an obscure book from the 1990s.
And, did you read? I think you gotta have it, so I definitely urge you to read that, because a lot of us, that is sort of a guiding philosophy, you know, the general idea of system collapse.
This is really required reading for members of the organization, and it's probably the most important text in the neo-Nazi world right now. They consider themselves the revolutionaries of the white power movement. And people in that part of the movement not only want to form groups in terrorist cell structures like the base, but they also want to use their propaganda to inspire others to go out and commit lone actor acts of terror.
They all use aliases to hide their identities.
This will be about 30 minutes, so let's start with the general question, and please tell us a little bit about yourself. And what is your ethnicity?
Many trying to join the base are teenagers. Time and again, the leadership discuss shaping their ideology. In other words, radicalizing them.
What we do now is we just go around and everyone kind of gives a thumbs up, thumbs down. And I think might need a little work ideologically, but he sounds like he's kind of on his way. You know, he's definitely headed in the right direction, it sounds like.
We tend to talk about groups like this as if they sort of emerged from the ether, but really what they're drawing on is a long-standing white power canon.
But what about the man who'd been promoting the base on his website? The man who calls himself Matthias.
Matthias, what do you think?
I think it's fine. I don't have any objections.
Finally, I'd heard his voice.
He seemed confident that he'd be able to, balance his obligations and that he would have no problem fulfilling them. So, yeah, he's got my thumbs up.
You get a kind of a sense of who is important in the base, and Matthias pops up in not a few of these calls, so he appears to be pretty senior too.
It feels like I'm getting closer to Matthias, but I still didn't know his real name. I ask Ali to see if he can help in my hunt to unmask him.
There's nothing about him online. He's been really careful to cover his tracks. We've got that avatar of him from Fascist Forge where you kind of see the half skull mask over his face, and but you can make out his hair, his long hair, and his eyes. And then digging around, there's one image of them in California, of the base cell in California posing with a flag. And you can see one of them has what appears to be that long flowing hair. And, I put the two side and side together. I blew them up. I looked at them and I said, that looks the same. Like, it looks like the same guy. So then I worked through a different set of contacts and I've come up with a name for him.
The name, Matthew Bakari. The founder of Fascist Forge and a senior figure in the base, a group seeking to expand its neo-Nazi network into Europe and the UK.
Fucking hell, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Nutters, yeah.
Could you explain who they are and what you discovered whilst you were in
Yeah, so, oh man, asking about 09 now, I'm going to sound like a nutcase now. So, as well as doing work, war and reporting, I often, war and conflict. So let's start again. as well as covering war and conflict, I cover extremist politics as well, because obviously a lot of extremists within politics become terrorists, become militants, whatever. It kind of goes hand in hand. So a few years back, I was looking into a neo-Nazi group called Atomwaffen Division, essentially a neo-Nazi paramilitary group in America. They killed, I think, 4 or 5 people in total. Where did that 09A come in? Yeah. So I was looking at them, and then all of a sudden I started seeing this weird satanic iconography come into their designs. And I recognise some of it because outside of my work, I'm fascinated with weird occult stuff. Not that I practice it or anything like that. I just find it interesting, cults and weird kind of devil worship type stuff. All the cheerful stuff, you know what I mean? So I was looking into it, and then I was like, hang on, I know that symbol. And basically, long story short, a satanic kind of occult group that started in England and believes in human sacrifices had made its way somehow through the internet to a neo-Nazi group in America who took on their iconography and were like, right, we're the paramilitary kind of neo-Nazi 09A force. 09A is Order of 9 Angles, this weird, and this isn't you get all these satanic idiots. Every third podcast in Britain is, have you heard about this satanic paedophile ring? And 9 times out of 10, it's unfortunately masking a very real issue, but blowing it out of proportion with nonsense conspiracy stuff. But this was real. Like, this is Order of Nine Angles is like actually linked to murders, 2 human sacrifices in Russia last year actually. So this is a real group, and I was like, wow, that's fascinating. And this Nazi group kind of took on O9A iconography, and some of them even kind of became more interested in the O9A than the Nazi stuff. And yeah, it's just this, the founder of it he was a former neo-Nazi terrorist, then he converted to Islam and became an Islamist, like an extremist. He wrote a whole book about how great like Al-Qaeda is, like, yeah, Osama bin Laden's cool, you know, like he was really on it. Then he kind of stopped that and went into this weird like spiritual stuff. He's the guy that's behind it. He claims he's not. It's him. Everybody knows it's him. And yeah, like he was linked to like the Brixton nail bombings. He's just a very weird guy, and now it's actually spreading. And there's kids as young as 13 and 14 have been convicted in Britain as being members of the O9A, or at least, well, they're not a prescribed organisation, so they're not convicted of being that, but they're convicted of the stuff that they've been involved with as a part of the O9A. And one of the darkest things is they get like girls, like young girls, to harm themselves, like self-harm, and they take images of it. And they're basically, their thing is, whatever is depraved, whatever is seen as fucked up by society, if we can indulge in that, we become like almost like not human anymore. Not physically, there's no physical change, but they become like desensitized to the point where they're like, right, we're just devil, evil kind of, but like real evil, you know. It's a weird concept. It sounds like a conspiracy, it sounds like a nutcase, but it's real, you know. The fact that, to give you an idea of how real it is, the government right now in Britain is considering prescribing the O9A as a terror organisation. So they know it's real. There's been several attacks related to them. And yeah, it's just like, it's a rabbit hole, you know. It's the maddest rabbit hole I've ever been into. I'm fascinated by it, you know, really fascinated by it. And the thing is as well, they've got like thousands and thousands of pages of like books, like law, like, you know, rituals. They have this mental game. It's like chess, but it's got like 5 different layers. It's called like the Stargate. Like, it's not just some idiot who's just spawned it on TikTok, you know. It's actually like loads and loads has gone into it, which is alluring for some people. For me, I'm like, fuck that. Like, it's mad, but it's mad. Yeah, it's mad. People love it though.
Just given how like kind of broad, weird, and esoteric their ideas are, how often do you think like sometimes people may not, who are involved with the group, don't like fully understand what they're interacting with? If you understand where I'm coming from there, it's kind of like they don't like get the full extent of what these people like want them to do or what it is.
It's a good question. I think it's, in a lot of cases, with anything as extreme and complicated as this, it's quite easy to, you know, see one part and then think it's something and then it's not the other and that. But I think with O9A, it's quite clear cut. You know, some of their earliest writings promote human sacrifice. I think if you're down with human sacrifice, you're pretty much over the line already, you know. So I think with them, because of that from the start, because they did that because they wanted to separate themselves from the kind of cheesy movie style Levian type Satanism. They wanted to put, no, we're like really evil. We believe in real evil. We believe it's a force to propel oneself into a higher being. Therefore, murder is a good thing to do against weak people. Like, if anything, it's a benefit for us as a whole, because you're not like killing someone. They see it as like you're enriching the world.
Almost like eugenics.
Yeah.
Almost like in a eugenic kind of way, yeah.
Absolutely, in a eugenics way, you're right. They had original material, not just ideologies and scriptures, but they had videos where there were O9A chants that were recorded in God knows where. It sounds like they're recorded in a church, and, you know, they had their own mythos, they had their own words, they had pages, like stacks and stacks and stacks of PDFs. And I was like, wow, like no one person could have put all this together just out of their mind in 2 days on their own. This is actually a thing. And even then, it wasn't so much of a thing, but there was a lot of dedicated people, a lot in Eastern Europe, actually. And yeah, and I just realized, like, out of all these kind of edgy satanic groups, not to say it's a good thing, but I was like, O9A are the ones that are like at least really about it. They're actually doing stuff. They're actually dedicated. They actually have a a real crux to what they're doing, even though, you know, a lot of it was stolen and plagiarized. At least it was there, it was real. I've always, with my work and my life, I guess, been fascinated with real people that step over the line, whether it's for good or bad. They step over the line and do, rather than theorizing and da-da-da-da. Not to say I'm glad that anyone steps over the line. Often it's a very terrible thing. I just mean professionally and I guess interest-wise, it's interesting to be like, wow, like they actually did this. They actually went and did that, which is, in this day and age especially, to actually do anything other than chat is a big deal. So that's why I guess I was drawn to it in that sense. And when I really started reading about it, I was like, this is disgusting. Like, this is hideous stuff, you know, like really dark stuff. And what they kind of fermented then over a decade that I've been looking into them now, actually, it's what they started then, where it's at now, or maybe like 2-3 years ago, but what it's become is what they always wanted it to become. And maybe not 100% how it is, but it's where it's on course, put it that way. They'll act like it's not, they never meant it to be like this, or this isn't the real O98. This is exactly what they wanted. This is what they've preached from the start. Now we're seeing O98. We saw O98 influence neo-Nazi groups. We saw O98 then influence neo-Nazi militant groups. And now it's this, what I call like ultra sadism. It's stepped into this new grounds of what is loosely connected internet groups that are obsessed with just sadism in the most disgusting way. And a lot of them will take on O98 iconography because that is like the most extreme of the extreme.
You know, a lot of people, they might struggle to wrap their heads around the idea of just kind of National Socialists, white nationalism, white supremacy, all blending around like these kind of like weird esoteric occultish ideas. How would you maybe like try and ease that into someone who's watching this and may not quite get why those things can coexist?
It's not Stormfront days anymore. It's not that no more. That was like the next step up from the old Nazism, and now it's something completely different.
Subcultures dedicated to a violent form of Satanism spread their hateful material online, but their influence is now being felt in the real world.
There have been too many examples of individuals who've been radicalized by this material. These ideas can directly lead to violence.
In June 2020, sisters Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman were brutally murdered in a knife attack by a stranger while celebrating Bieber's birthday in a London park.
So, being that was included with it, do you think it could have been some type of sacrifice to receive that?
That might be the intention that they were going for, but for Fehu, that's not how you do it. So that's
where I was getting to.
Yeah, that's what really stumps me. It's like, okay, if they're going for wealth, why would you sacrifice someone?
Their misogynistic killer, Daniel Hussein, now 19, believed he'd entered a demonic pact in which he'd committed to killing women. He was convicted in July 2021.
Face me, hands on your head, stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
Officers who arrested Hussein found a handwritten agreement in his bedroom in which he promised to sacrifice only women in return for money and power. In the past 2 years, 7 young men, 6 of them teenagers, have been sentenced for neo-Nazi terrorism offences in which a violent Satanist organisation was a key radicaliser. Daniel Hussein's was not a terrorist case, but he was influenced by material he found online. Hussein had earlier been referred by his school to the counter-extremism programme PREVENT, owing to his interest in the extreme right wing. But very little has been publicly revealed about how he came to hold his belief in demonic pacts. Concerned by what might still be out there, we've kept investigating. Hussein was active on a forum devoted to certain forms of Satanism and the occult. He joined in March 2018 while he was being assessed by PREVENT, telling others he was a psychic vampire. He sought advice on demonic pacts. The forum is run by an American self-styled black magician called E.A. Kurting. Hussein introduced himself by saying, "I absolutely love E.A. and his work," and had learned his first spell from him. Kurting's real name is Matthew Lawrence from Utah. He's previously been convicted of drug and weapon possession charges. Curtin sells expensive books and courses and uses social media to promote himself. Hussein remained on the forum for 2 years. After the murders, it took a month to identify him using DNA. He last logged into the forum only hours before his arrest. Daniel Hussein's beliefs mirror ideas promoted by Curtin. The so-called pact written by the murderer, in which he committed to killing women, was addressed to the mighty king Lucifuge Rofakale, believed by Hussein to be a powerful demon. Curtin promotes the idea that people can enter into pacts with Lucifuge, but says that real-world action will be required if their requests are to succeed.
And if you want to make a pact with the powers of darkness as a whole, Lucifuge is the guy you need to talk to.
There are parallels between Curtin's public instructions about such pacts and what Hussein did. He instructs people to sign the pact in blood, something done by Hussein, but that Lucifuge's signature will be visible only to you. A blank space was on the killer's document. Curtin says the final pact should be brought before the demon, lit only by candlelight. Hussein bought candles at the same time he purchased the knife used to murder Bieber and Nicole. Curtin says, include in your pact the attainment of wealth. Hussein asked for wealth and a lottery win. Some of Curtin's writings openly discuss and encourage murder. One book explains how to kill with a knife in a ritual sacrifice. Another work quotes the Moors murderer Ian Brady and advocates terrorist methods. The text was written for the American Nazi Satanist group Temple of Blood that appeared as an influence on the 7 young men recently convicted of neo-Nazi terror offences. The American group is part of a broader violent Satanist network, Order of Nine Angles, first founded in Britain. 2 neo-Nazi groups influenced by the ideology have recently been outlawed in the UK as terrorist organisations. Professor Matthew Feldman was an expert in all 7 UK terror cases.
I think it's important to say certainly not all forms, even most forms of Satanism are not violent. But this very specific form of what's called left-hand path Satanism is a sort of social Darwinistic idea of the strong dominating the weak. A lot of language about what they call culling or murder, different types of sacrifice, different types of self-harm. These ideas can directly lead to violence. And I think that we recognize with other forms of extremism that ideas can lead to terrorism and to violence. And I think it's no different in this case.
We wrote to Curtin setting out our findings. We didn't receive a response. The motive for the murders of Bieber and Nicole seemed beyond belief, but how the killer came to hold his beliefs may be becoming clearer.
My name is Jake Hanrahan. I'm an independent journalist and documentary filmmaker, generally focused on conflict and underground activity. Order of Nine Angles is a esoteric, occult ideology, order, if you like, and it's based on Satanism, but it's different. It's not, like LaVeyan Satanism. It's kind of like cringy atheism, like they don't actually believe in some devil, whereas ONA do. They believe in dark gods, demons. It's that they wouldn't say it's demons, but just, to give the layman an idea of what this kind of thing is. And essentially they believe in almost embracing the taboos of normal society in a bid to evolve into this sort of evolved being, this more evil, more what they see as powerful. I mean, they see like madness and hate and going against all morals as a good thing because it makes you more powerful. And through their various gnosis and teachings, you can achieve this kind of higher status of being. You can essentially evolve into a new type of person and then, eventually open up the dark gates to the other dimensions and all of this madness. There's a lot to it, but that's the kind of long and short of it. And within this ideology, they have very strongly embraced fascism, National Socialism, pedophilia, disgusting things. The idea is that, well, those things are taboo, and the O9A is above normal society, above the normies, if you like, so much so that they will embrace paedophilia, which is just disgusting beyond words. They now backtrack and they say they never endorsed paedophilia. Mountains of evidence that they did in their own writings. They literally put it out there, and they've always embraced neo-Nazism. They even say that, oh well, we don't actually embrace Nazism as an ideology. It's for kind of symbolic purposes, which is bullshit when you realize that they use a specific dating system, which starts from Hitler's birthday. So, when you bring that up to them, they go like quiet. And the reason that they embrace neo-Nazism is because the founder, David Meyer, is a lifelong British neo-Nazi. He was very involved in political far-right violence in Britain in the 80s and the 90s. And he also then got into Islam. He became like a radical jihadist, and then he formed again in this Order of Nine Angles stuff, and he made up this whole mythos of where the Order of Nine Angles came from. There was a man called Anton Long who was an occultist. Anton Long is the pseudonym of David Meyer, and Anton Long found it from this old lady that in Shropshire, she had Camlad. She had like these other. She brought all these other occult orders into one thing and created the Order of Nine Angles and passed it on to Anton Long. Now, there's no evidence whatsoever that this woman ever existed. A lot of the mythos and the ideology, not the ideology, sorry, the kind of myth making, the kind of the lore, if you like, of the Order of Nine Angles is quite heavily lifted from Wicca, and even some of it seems to be like like a rip-off of H.P. Lovecraft. So there's a lot to it. Huh?
Warhammer?
Warhammer, I don't know, man. I don't know much about the Warhammer.
Oh, that's just like the whole Imperium thing, that they believe they're going to colonize the stars. That's all I know about.
Yes. I mean, one thing that is honest that they say, it's not necessarily an organization in the way of you sign up and you're a member. It's an ideology that you become an adherent of, right? Which they would argue then means that they can never be held responsible for anything, which is ridiculous. I mean, neo-Nazism is an ideology, a political one. If someone commits violence in the act of neo-Nazism, they're still a neo-Nazi. You know what I mean? So, and that's even more broad than what the Order of Nine Angles is. The Order of Nine Angles is very specifically niche and hell of a lot smaller than that ideology. So the idea that they can't be held responsible, considering that people conduct violent acts based off of their very teachings, that is human sacrifice, that's a part of what they believe in, is just nonsense. And they know it is, but they think it's very clever to play these games and tie people up in knots. And to be honest, I'm kind of guilty of getting into these debates with them a little bit and like showing them evidence like why what I'm saying is right, why it's very clear that they're lying. And that's kind of what they want you to do. They're tying you up in knots. They're taking time away from you rather than you doing what you should be doing. So they like to have these debates on the internet, which is very funny that, an order that sees itself above what they call Magian society, as that those people, that they see themselves as so elite that they would then spend a lot of time arguing with people on Twitter. I was working with a lad actually recently, a former member who really turned like actually against them, realized, he was very young, he grew up, he realized like this is madness. And we did like some really good research. None of it's really come out yet. I'm working on something very big for it. So we realized that Thormund was uploading documents to like these hosting websites and then citing them in his arguments like 10 minutes later. So he'd be like, here's this O9A paper that says this, or this, like this goes against what you said. And then you would find out he'd literally just uploaded it. It's very funny. And then when you point that out, he'd just always have a reason to, you can never pin him down. You could pin him down, but he would always like, that's not true. And it was just, I realized, I was like, right, this guy isn't actually trying to defend himself. He's trying to tie us up in knots to maybe distract us from what we actually should be doing, which is gathering this work and whatever. And then that ideology for years it was kind of a joke. It was often known as the Order of No Members for a while in satanic left-hand path
I
circles.
heard they had like only like 12 members worldwide for a while.
I mean, like I say, members is a loose term, but in terms of like active adherents, for the sake of argument, you could say members. I certainly was more than that, but it was not a lot. Now it's never been so big, which is ironic because they're now pushing this narrative that Order of No Angles is dead, it's died out, and that's again because of this possible ban, and they're worried about it. But yeah, they've never been so active. They've had so many members. In the last 8 years, I believe there's, I think, a dozen murders associated or directly carried out by O9A adherents. In Russia, there was, I think, 4. A couple murdered 4 people in a open, out-and-out human sacrifice, and they were allegedly formed an O9A Nexion, which is what they would call a cell. I guess, a provincial church, if you like, if you were looking at it in terms of traditional religious categorization. And so they have these cells, these Nexions, and yeah, this Russia one, this couple got arrested for drug dealing, and out of the blue, they were like, you know what, we want to confess we've killed people. And then they were like, yeah, we did it, we're Satanists, we did it as a part of a human sacrifice. And then when the Russian police went to the spot where they said, they were like, yeah, they found the bones, so it was true. And yeah, so they actually did human sacrifices. There was a guy in Canada, he did a prayer, an O9A altar, uploaded it to YouTube, and then went out and murdered somebody. Atomwaffen Division, the neo-Nazi militant group in the US, who have 5 murders under their belt. At least 3 of those, the people that did them were O9A adherents or O9A curious. Yeah, there's 2 incidents that we know of serious organized violence that didn't go through but was planned to go through in the US military. Recently, Ethan Melzer, he planned to murder his whole platoon in what would be essentially an O9A offering, if you like a mass sacrifice. He was stationed in Turkey, and he was talking to Al-Qaeda people, trying to basically get them to ambush his position, his base, with all his people as a part of an O9A thing. Just madness.
Are most of these murders, are they typically the human sacrifice variety of it, or is it just...
This is the thing, we don't know, but when people think of human sacrifice, they picture some kind of ritual in the woods and a big ceremony and whatever. That's not necessarily what O9A does, how they do their human sacrifices. They even say in some of their texts, try and make it look like an accident, try not to get caught. If you get caught, you've failed your mission, which is part of this, it's evolutionary praxis for the O9A. Is called the sevenfold way, and it's this is what you have to do to kind of rise up the ideological ranks, and one of those things to get to a certain, I think it's an adept, I think it's called, to get to that stage, you have to go out and kill someone as a sacrifice. But they obviously, not everyone has the capacity to kill or whatever, so they kind of make it easier for people, and will be you can ruin someone's life, kill them like that, theoretically. So it started off where it had to be a murder, and then it became oh well, you can just ruin someone's life if you want. But yeah, they say make it an accident, make it look like that. So you don't know, they could have pushed someone off a bridge and been yeah, all right, I killed someone. And that's the idea. The idea is that if they commit these human sacrifices, it must be of what they consider weaker people. They prey on the weak. They're kind of very cowardly in that regard.
Only a coward would do such a thing.
So it's really weird. There's a real contradiction with what they put out there in their teachings to their adherents versus the way they act publicly. So they're really in this weird space where they bend their ideologies, they bend their rules, they bend their message to whichever way suits them. So a murder, I mean, okay, some O9A people, have gone and done a murder, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a murder to cull, if you like, So I don't know. It's a grey area for them. I want to make a full doc about O9A, but it is serious, like I get the funny side to it. I even find it funny. Like even the guys that the Empire Never Ended, I get why they cover it in a really funny way, you know, and they're mocking it the whole time. Yeah, totally, I get it, it makes sense. But there is I try not to come at it from that. You know, I try and come at it a little bit different. Try and not have any respect for them. I have no respect for ONNA, but I try and at least have a human connection, interaction with them, because ultimately they want to kill people, you know, and that's not funny. And they want to kill people based on just shutting down their freedoms of who they are. So that's really bad. And yeah, so I find it interesting. And also, like, it's a deeply complicated and interesting ideology. You know, other than the evil disgustingness of it, if you can just put that aside for a moment, it's very interesting. You know, it's very advanced in terms of its foundation. You know, it's not there is some thought put into it, and I don't think always kind of just sneering at it helps. You know, it's like you get this thing where leftists will always, if there's a fascist that's a good writer, they'll be like, he's a shit writer. Well, he might be a good writer. Just because you don't like what he's saying doesn't then remove the fact that he's a good writer. You know what I'm saying? Not that I'm saying anyone at ONNA is a good writer. The text is just appallingly written. Like, it's ridiculous. It's like the most purple, elitist prose you've ever read. But my point is, it's like you have to at least engage with some elements of the seriousness of it and the bits that are well done, because those are the bits that draw people in that then become involved in it and then ruin someone else's lives or their own. So I think laughing at it all the time is not always helpful. You know what I'm saying?
It's like a lot of black metal shit. I feel like, I don't know. It's kind of a weird way to put it, but yeah.
No, it is, and there's like quite a few like underground black metal bands throughout the years that were associated with ONNA. In fact, there's one I believe was in Norway, and the lead singer or the lead guitarist or something killed himself. And by all accounts, the suicide note, he killed himself as a sacrifice to ONNA. It's not very well documented, actually, but the guy I was working with on this showed it to me, and I was very scared. I was like, nah, man, come on, get the fuck out of here. And when you looked into it, it was like, oh, no, shit, like, this is legit. He even wrote a phrase that essentially said, like, I've given myself to, you know, the dark gods. But that's how it is. So, yeah, it's serious, you know. But, yeah, no, definitely there's a lot of, like, National Socialist black metal scene get into ONNA. Sol, there's actually like a musician, Sol Evil. He's been a long-standing ONNA there, and he even uses like the logo on his albums and shit. Whether he does that just because he's edgy, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's quite legit. Because I remember I ordered this like mail order magazine about ONNA 10 years ago from Finland, and you had to send like 10 euros in an envelope and to some random address, some PO box. And I was like, I'm never getting this fucking magazine. And they sent it. And I remember there was a profile of him in there, and yeah, and like the Atomwaffen guys, like the main guys, John Cameron Denton, the other guys, his pseudonym was Chimera. These people were National Socialist black metal people, you know, before they were Atomwaffen, and they were ONNA before they were Atomwaffen. They picked up through that scene, so it definitely has a. If you're into NSBM, it's very serious. It's in there, like evil stuff. You know, like it's a real hardcore subculture. Actually, obviously I don't like it, but it is interesting. It's one of those like it has to be really hardcore. So through that, these people seek out like the dark stuff. For example, you know, Varg Vikernes and their mayhem and burning down the churches. You know, there's an element of that. The ONNA is garnered attention and respect in those circles for a good 2-3 decades.
How much is lifted from like Norse mythology in ONNA?
Not a lot. They're less into that shit and more into old school British esotericism, which is, in my opinion, a world of its own. I think it's quite separate from like that Norse stuff. Britain has I mean, we don't get taught about it at all here. You have to really search out for it. But we have a very amazingly interesting kind of epicenter of esoteric culture, occult orders, occult underground groups. We have so much of it here. There's so many weird sites, paganism, like there are small parts of England where you'll go to the village, you know, and everyone there is, you know, like 99% of them are Catholic, but 100% of them are pagan. Do you get what I'm saying? Like it's like this underlying thing that has always been there. I mean, even like Morris dancing, you know, traditional old school British stuff. And I'm talking, not talking British Empire, not talking British royal family, like real indigenous. And I'm not saying that in a right wing way at all. I fucking hate all that stuff. What I mean is, like, before the state came and took it over, before the royal family come and monarchy started like becoming the most popular thing, locally, weird, esoteric, strange traditions were the norm here, especially with pagan type stuff. So I think like a lot of that is still under the surface, not so much, but there are places when you go up north, you'll see it, and it's fucking weird, man, and it's super interesting, you know, real Wicker Man type shit, you know. I think O9A is more inspired by that already existing traditional British esoteric occult culture as opposed to Norse mythology. How much Norse mythology has then influenced, you know, before influenced the British part of that, I don't know.
As far as their terrorist association, have they actually succeeded in any terrorist attacks? Because it seems like everyone I've heard about, they actually got foiled.
Yeah, I mean, there's no like planned multi-group O9A member bombing or stuff like that. It's, I mean, to be honest, that style of militancy is kind of not dying out, but it's not the norm anymore. I don't feel it's lone wolf shit, you know. It's strange little guys planning stuff in their bedrooms. It's very hard to stop. Siege culture mentality, essentially, but with an esoteric occult.
That's one of the things you wanted to get into is siege culture too, as well.
Siege and O9A have kind of gone hand in hand in terms of they're both like the most extreme of the extreme, or at least were when they kind of were popping out. There's more extreme stuff out there now, and it's more than just surface level. It's more than just like, oh, Siege was edgy, O9A was edgy. It made sense. Actually, James Mason has a long-standing connection with occultism and weird. I don't know.
James Mason
like,
is also a convicted pedophile as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, right. So yeah. So that's a big thing that is. I mean, honestly, like it's almost a meme at this point. But the pedo element, like they all have it in common. But James Mason has links to Charles Manson, and that's why Charles Manson became like another kind of figurehead within Atomwaffen Division, and at one point the leader of Atomwaffen, the second leader after Brandon Russell was put into prison, John Cameron Denton, alias R Word, I'll say because you're on YouTube, he said at one point in the internal chats that we were hold of that he felt that Charles Manson was above Hitler in terms of intellect and, you know, who he wants to follow. So they already had that esoteric leanings and weird other dark ideologies, and the two just went like that. Yeah, I don't know, there's a lot of crossover, but long story short is James Mason, who wrote Siege, has long been interested in esoteric dark ideologies. Like universal order is like this ideology that Manson had, and that's what siege culture, the National Socialists, but they're universal order people, you know, and that's like this almost this different elevated National Socialist ideology. And yeah, it's all amalgamated into this weird dark syrup of just fuckery, really. You know, this guy Ethan Melzer, the O9A guy that wanted to blow up his whole unit in the US military, he was saying that his US military role was an insight role, right? He didn't really believe in America. He hated America. But it taught him how to use guns. It taught him stuff for Day of the Rope and all that bullshit. And it also allowed him to kind of have this secret identity. And I guess for them, it's kind of fun. They're kind of live action role playing as like a secret agent in some way. You know, like, haha, they all think I'm really a Muslim, but actually I'm a weird satanic Nazi and whatever, you know. So it's a weird one. A lot of them go and do Islamic insight roles because they quite like Islam, you know, they quite in favor of extreme Islam, I should say. They like that side of it. They're not necessarily even they don't really have a problem with Muslims as such. They're more against like Judeo-Christianity. That's their real issue. I don't really think there's much. I mean, to be honest, Atomwaffen was maybe a good example because Denton and Chimera, they joined and they were O9A and they very quickly introduced O9A literature. Like it got really weird, like very quickly, as soon as Denton took over, the canon of what you have to read, the reading material, to be in Atomwaffen. Suddenly 09A literature started coming up, and I couldn't believe it because I'd known what this was for years, and I was investigating Atomwaffen, and all of a sudden this 09A stuff started coming in. I couldn't believe it. It was like, wow, like it was like someone made the story for me. I was like, is this a simulation? So it's very interesting to see that, and I think they did try and subvert Atomwaffen because a lot of people left when that stuff came into it, and they were very much trying to turn it into this more sinister side of things. So yeah, I think that's actually probably one of the main examples of subversion of a group. But at the same time, those people were also neo-Nazis. I think they just wanted to turn Atomwaffen into a 09A Nazi group rather than just standard. And it all ties into the accelerationist theories as well.
So I decided to delete the ending I originally put together for this video. Actually, let me back up a bit. Before the Franks memo, I had never heard of Odinism. I didn't know shit about pre-Christian anything. I just didn't. But I tend to agree with the highest form of ignorance is rejecting something you don't know anything about. So after the Franks memo came out, I got to it. Until this video started approaching 6 hours long and somehow still barely scratched the surface. I ended up cutting out so much, basically anything that wasn't directly relevant to the reason I decided to do this in the first place, because that's why we're here. At the time of recording this blurb, I'm still timestamping citations for a Google Doc to make it easier for people to find the exact receipts of anything at any point in this video. I'm well over the 100 mark, because I haven't included anything in this video there's not a receipt for. I honestly can't tell if I'm burnt out or bummed out, but the part I deleted was just so dark and bleak. I didn't want to end this video on that note because everything about how this case was handled from day one is demoralizing enough. So I'm going to end this video with two things. First, when I think about this case, about who would actually do this shit, I always get stuck on the astronomical statistical anomalies of the victims and just how fucking strange the crime scene was. It's the kind of strange you can't fake. The kind of strange that can only exist by blending in fringe spaces where it's hard to shock anyone. That's just where I'm at. The last thing is technically unrelated, but relevant. I think about it a lot. Around 2 o'clock on July 7th of 2021, a man drove his truck to the gate of the FBI resident building in Terre Haute, Indiana, got out, and threw a Molotov cocktail at the building. When Terre Haute Police Detective and FBI Task Force Officer Greg Ferency walked out of the building, the man confronted him and shot him. Ferency was able to return fire but ultimately died from his injuries. When an agent inside the facility heard the gunshots, he went outside and engaged the man in a gun battle. After being shot twice by the agent, the man was able to get into his truck and flee the scene. The suspect drove himself to the Terre Haute Regional Hospital, where he was taken into custody after undergoing surgery for his injuries. The suspect was later identified as Shane Meehan, former corrections officer at the Federal Corrections Complex in Terre Haute from 2005 to 2017. David Lane was housed at the Federal Corrections Complex in Terre Haute until his death in 2007.
You know, a lot of people, they might struggle to wrap their heads around the idea of just kind of National Socialists, white nationalism, white supremacy, all blending around like these kind of like weird esoteric occultish ideas.
Asatru.
How would you maybe like try and ease that into someone who's watching this and may not quite get why those things can coexist?
Not Stormfront days anymore. It's not that no more. That was like the next step up from the old Nazism, and now it's something completely different.
I say, don't do it. But if you're gonna do it, for God's sake, do it right.
And leave something with you.
Focus.
Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there.